Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed audiences, our guests and friends, welcome to our event. We are the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and today we have a book launch for you. And first of all, please let us invite the director of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, professor and editor of our volume, Hybrid Threats in Baltics and Taiwan, Professor Andris Sprots. Welcome, Professor.
Una, good morning and thank you so much for introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, and friends, colleagues, good morning today. And of course, I am pleased to welcome everyone also in this virtual format to the book presentation. The book presentation, this time on Commonalities, Risks and Lessons for Small Democracies on Hybrid Threats in Baltics and Taiwan. The book presentation and conversation is always a pleasant event, as it is the result of creative cooperative endeavor already for a longer period. Certainly societies are being recently tested by a variety of stress tests, if not storms. A COVID pandemic has brought societies to lockdowns. And of course, international cooperation also has been somewhat tested by an even distribution of vaccines and also vaccine diplomacy. We are developed and being interconnected very much in technological domain. But of course, also that creates a lot of vulnerabilities and challenges. So on the one hand, development and modern societies, at the same time, we face some challenges also in this regard. And of course, if we watch the news recently, we see the geopolitics of resentment have increased risks of global and regional conflicts. And of course, it's not just for recent developments in recent times, we've seen perhaps it for the last decades. This shows how much the world is interconnected. Of course, societies interact in many ways in global village. And it also underlines an important understanding that internal strength of societies is very much indispensable in these stormy times to withstand those challenges. And already coming closer to the book, of course, small democracies in the Baltics and Taiwan are not exceptions, facing those challenges of variety of hybrid threats, and also realizing importance of increasing societal resilience. So in this regard, in this context, cooperation, comparison, exchange of best practices is always important. And of course, this has been the main goal of this publication and certainly of the forthcoming conversation. So we thank Taipei Mission in Latvia for cooperation and support. We are also very happy to have a distinguished group of authors to contribute, and of course, an excellent panel of speakers today to discuss those issues, which are very much important and relevant for our society. So I think this is a very timely book presentation and very timely conversation. So I am wishing a successful debate today and transferring back responsibilities of moderation to Dr. Una Alexandra Berzni-Cherenkova, who of course is the faculty member at Riga Stradiņš University and also the head of the Asia program at Latvian Institute of International Affairs. Una, the floor is back yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor. And now it's my turn to say a few words about the volume itself. Now, I want to point out that it is available for download at the LIIA website, and the full name, Hybrid Threats in Baltics and Taiwan, Commonalities, Risks and Lessons for Small Democracies. What does this volume contain then? In fact, it is the chapters. There are 8 chapters in total, and 3 of the authors are with us here today, and we'll have a discussion with us. And the chapters are divided into several sections, including societal resilience and political legitimacy, energy and critical infrastructure security, cybersecurity. Of course, we cannot talk about hybrid threats without cybersecurity, and of course, cybersecurity feeds also into the other chapters. And finally, strategic communication. So you're welcome to give that a read. And now for our discussion, let me introduce the excellent panel that Professor already referred to in his address. First of all, we have J. Michael Cole. J. Michael Cole is a Taipei-based senior fellow with the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington, D.C., the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa, Canada, and the Taiwan Studies Program at the University of Nottingham, UK. J. Michael Cole holds a master's degree in war studies from the Royal Military College in Canada, and he is also a practitioner. He has that experience as he is a former intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I want to point out that J. Michael Cole is a published and esteemed author, and his latest book just came out in 2020. Sorry, that's me still living in 2021. So his latest book came out 2 years ago in 2020, but still pretty recent. Welcome, Michael. Looking forward to talking to you today. We also have with us Vida Machikenaite, who is an assistant professor at the International University of Japan. So quite a geography here today. Vida holds graduate degrees from Keio University in Japan and Fudan University in China. Her major field of research is Chinese domestic and foreign policies, but she's also interested in authoritarian regimes and state capacity in comparative perspective. I want to add that Vida has been a very sought-after expert in the recent year due to the Lithuanian developments, and she's definitely one of the top experts to speak on that. So welcome, Vida. And we also have our good friend and an old colleague, Ivo Jurve, who is the head of Security and Resilience Program and Research Fellow at the International Center for Defense and Security, ICDS, coming to us from Tallinn, I believe. Ivo has been a practitioner in the field of security for over 13 years. He has advised the National Security and Defense Coordination Unit of the Estonian Government Office, and also the head of the International Security Institute of the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, pardon me. Now, Ivo holds a PhD from the University of Tartu, and he has also taught there at his alma mater. And he also has taught at the Estonian Military Academy, Estonian School of Diplomacy, NATO School, and Frontex Master's Program. Now, Ivo writes and lectures on information warfare, intelligence services, and other forms of hybrid conflict. So Ivo is right at home in this discussion. He has also worked as an honorary research fellow at University College London. He has spoken at Stanford and Georgetown. And Ivo is also the author of several books and numerous articles. So an excellent panel. So also for our audience, I just want to quickly give some information regarding how you can contribute to today's conversation. We welcome questions. Please scan the QR code in the left corner of your screen, or alternatively, you can just log into SLI, so Slido, and post with the hashtag LIIA. January 20. But I think the QR option is better. So please let us jump right to it. Vida, if you don't mind me asking, I mean, we are used to conduct comparisons among similar objects, right? We normally compare things that are close, such as we're so used to compare Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. What are the similarities here when we're talking about the Baltics and Taiwan?
Thank you, Una. Yes, indeed, as you noted, that at the first glance, this comparison between the Baltics and Taiwan might be, well, surprising, to say the least, right? But then as you look closer, you probably, well, you start seeing some kind of a pattern when we are talking about the hybrid threats that that the Baltic states and Taiwan faces. You can see a pattern, well, kind of the framework which is suitable for comparison, and it does indeed offer these cases. The Baltic states and Taiwan offer I would say a rather good two cases to compare. And just, well, there are several elements that I would like to highlight that make these cases comparable and, well, that, like I said, offer a good framework for that. So the first one is when we are talking about the hostile actors in, well, the hybrid warfare that the Baltic states and Taiwan faces. So the actors share, the hostile actors of the two cases do share some, well, similarities, right? These would be, the major source of activities is said to come from, well, for the Baltic states, from Russia. And the security services have long emphasized, like for years have been pointing out that Russia has been, and it still remains to be, the major source of hostile activities against the Baltic states. While at the same time for Taiwan, well, my colleagues in the volume also point out that a large number of cases of hybrid warfare used against Taiwan also originates from China. Would it be cyber activity, cyber security? Would it be misinformation? Well, the military activities around Taiwan, or, well, that's still like the actor next to, well, next door, let's put it this way, a major actor, a large country with a very different regime, right? We are talking about small democracies that we are comparing, and then we have the hostile actors next to them with very different regime types. And that's what I would say the first element probably that brings those two cases on the same line if we want to compare that. And then the next one, well, would be the goals of those hostile actors. If you look at the Baltic region, at the Baltic states, and at Taiwan, we can also see, well, similarities in terms of the goals those hostile actors pursue, and that's very often, well, I put it very, like, generally, and it's not that I can mention all of the goals, but generally this has been the aim of those actors, like China and Russia, has been to undermine the very social fabric of the target countries, so in the Baltics or in Taiwan. And that could be, well, trying to shape public opinion, to undermine public's support for democracy, like democratic institutions, for state institutions. In the case of the Baltics, also there has been well, an issue that information campaigns would target Western partners, right? Like NATO alliance. NATO partners, membership in the EU sometimes, and in the case of Taiwan, I believe that would also would be this, like, well, basically undermining or targeting Taiwan's ability capacity to stay well, to resist China's influence. So, and also when we are talking about the goals, probably I could ask that also in the case of the Baltics and Taiwan, some of the strategies employed, hybrid strategies employed by those two actors are also similar. Of course, there are differences as well, but there are similar strategies such as cooptation. In the Baltics, we still have, well, we see ethnic groups, different ethnic groups, like in Lithuania's case, that would be Polish and Russians, and in Latvia and Estonia, more of Russians, and these groups would be targeted by, once again, by hostile forces, or by Russia mainly, as indicated, as security services point out, that this is, well, the Russian authorities would try to co-opt them, try to in a way advocate or promote the agenda favored by Russia, right? And my colleagues again in the volume write about similar co-optation attempts in Taiwan. And finally, that would be also the nature of challenges faced. Once again, there are different challenges that the Baltic region, the Baltic states, and Taiwan faces, but I would see some considerable overlaps, and that would mainly be cybersecurity, like the concern over cyber attacks, and also the well, disinformation or misinformation. That has been for Baltic states, that has been a very significant challenge, and ever since 2007 attack on Estonia, and then, well, probably even before that, there has been it has been obvious that the information sphere needs some needs to be protected in a way, or the society needs to be educated how to handle that. And also when it comes to Taiwan, there's some data that cyber attacks from China, from the mainland, there are like continuous, constant attacks in cyberspace. And then when it comes to misinformation or disinformation, also there has been a report that 1/4, a quarter of misinformation related to pandemics in Taiwan came from China, and that's just one of the cases that I mentioned. But basically, these are the major challenges that those countries face. So when we think about the Baltic states and Taiwan in terms of, when we talk about hybrid threats, and we think about them in terms of the hostile actors they face or they need to resist, in terms of the goals that those actors pursue, and also the challenges that the Baltic states and Taiwan faces, I would say we have a very good framework for comparison, for comparing these two cases, the Baltic states and Taiwan. And then why it's so important. It definitely can offer some lessons. While these two places are very far apart, we can look at one and another and see how similar challenges, or how kind of hostile actors of similar nature can be, how those countries and regions can respond to. So that's probably the most important thing, that there are lessons definitely that can be learned from each other.
Yes, perfect. That's completely convincing. And just to pick up on some of the things that Vida just said, Michael, I turn to you now. In the contribution in the book, Vida, as well as our Taiwanese colleagues, they talk about increasing the resilience of the population to counter fake news. And Vida just spoke about outside actors trying to exploit the ethnic and historical divisions in the Baltic societies. Now, Michael, in your article, you touch upon a similar subject. You mentioned polarization of the Taiwanese society. Now, if you had to comment on the similarities, we're still on that, right? The similarities part. Do we also see specific groups in Taiwan that they're being more susceptible to fake news as we do in the Baltics? And what are these groups and what can be done?
Right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to take part today. It's truly an honor to be part of that book project and to be allowed to speak today and share my views. First off, I would like to perhaps point out the fact that small democracies might actually be a bit of a misnomer when it comes to Taiwan, given both the sides of its economy and of its population as well, with 23.5 million people, somewhat equivalent to the population of Australia, for example. But of course, if you place that democracy next to a giant authoritarian regime like in China, of course, Taiwan does seem to be small. I think it might be splitting hairs, but it also does have an impact on self-perception and perhaps people's willingness to resist outside aggression as well. So I think it's important to point that out to begin with. Now, to your question, again, I think I would like to split that question into two. First of all, it's important to take a very quick look at the sources of disinformation and misinformation targeting Taiwan. So from the outside, certainly China is the primary source of that type of information. So within the PRC, we have the Unite Front Work Department and allied units that do generate and spread disinformation. Units like Taiwan Affairs Office under the State Council, the PLA is a contributor to this as well. You have the so-called 50 centers that also act upon direction by the Chinese regime to spread disinformation aimed at Taiwan. And you also have the patriots in China who are acting independently, but also are fueling that barrage of disinformation aimed at Taiwan and the international community. We also see among ethnic Chinese communities outside China, in places like Malaysia, for example, that also have played an active role in spreading disinformation against Taiwan, oftentimes using families who have substantive business links with China. So there's a bit of a quid pro quo, if you will, that in return for playing a role in disinformation campaign against Taiwan, they see an increased ability to make fortunes back in China. Now, there's also elements within Taiwan that are contributing to disinformation, generating and spreading. So you do have pro-CCP, pro-unification groups within Taiwan. You have so-called red media in Taiwan, official, traditional and non-traditional. You have political parties, you have civil society, sub-state actors, you have influencers on platforms like YouTube, for example. You have artists who are making a living in the PRC. So you have content farms that are launched by business people who are doing business in China. You have the so-called Taishan, so business people who are Taiwanese, but who are located in China. There's approximately 1 million or 1/23 of Taiwan's overall population who are based in China. Some of those elements might be willing contributors to disinformation, psychological warfare, and whatnot against Taiwan. Now, to your question on ethnicity, given Taiwan's history, as we know, a lot of Taiwanese, most of them, their ancestors came from China. Certainly following World War II as well, and the KMT's defeat in the Chinese Civil War, you had a few million Chinese fleeing to Taiwan. And then, over decades, they had their families and all that. They grew their roots in Taiwan, but they still have that affinity and, ancestral roots back in China. So within that particular ethnic group, you would likely find people who are a bit more amenable to receiving, internalizing disinformation from China, and perhaps even spreading it for political goals. Now, as to the targets, as I said, the people in Taiwan who are pro-unification, which is now in the low single digits in Taiwan, are certainly more receptive to that material, that information, and also willing to spread it. And by doing so, they are reinforcing the political polarization that exists in Taiwan, perhaps also trying to win hearts and minds or to convince Taiwanese that their future lies with China. Although given the current context and certainly situation in China, that particular aspect of disinformation is not yielding the dividends that Beijing is looking for. Then also within Taiwan, you have groups, people who are not necessarily pro-unification, but they're nevertheless opposed to either the ruling Democratic Progressive Party or to President Tsai Ing-wen herself, or to Taiwanese independence, de jure independence. Now, by receiving and disseminating disinformation that is either generated in China or within Taiwan, they may become inadvertent or unconscious disseminators of disinformation that actually originated in China. That also includes supporters of the opposition Kuomintang, particularly those who nowadays seem to regard the DPP as the greatest enemy, as opposed to the external threat that is posed by China. So all this as well exacerbates polarization within Taiwan, both ethnic, but certainly political as well. And that's something that China certainly benefits, because it prevents the emergence of a kind of united front within Taiwan that tries to push back against China. Then you also have certain issue-based groups within Taiwan. For example, those that opposed same-sex marriage legalization a few years ago, those that opposed pension reform by the Tsai administration, who also are willing to replicate disinformation that comes from China only to score points against the government. It doesn't necessarily mean that they believe the content of that disinformation or that even agree with the Chinese regime, but that gives them ammunition to try to generate further pressure against the government and to discredit it. Now, again, all these issues, the key aim is to reinforce opposition to the ruling DPP and President Tsai in Taiwan, also to erode belief and support for democratic institutions within Taiwan, to generate confusion within the public, certainly over COVID and vaccines. We've seen that in the past couple of years as well. Loads of disinformation coming from China to discredit the domestic vaccine in Taiwan, the government's response to COVID-19. Now, one of the key groups that tends to spread disinformation are elderly, who oftentimes uncritically will receive information by friends and simply post that on their Line group. That's one of the apps that's very popular in Taiwan, and without really giving any thought as to whether this is based on facts or might even be harmful to the country. And then there's a last segment as well within Taiwan, within what we call the Green Camp, so the pro-independence, pro-DPP camp, but individuals and groups that nevertheless are not supporters of Tsai Ing-wen. So you have elements within those groups that have been spreading for the past 2 or 3 years, disinformation, basically putting into question the fact that President Tsai has a PhD from LSE in the UK. And also spreading other disinformation. Again, not because they're supporters of the CCP or support unification with China, but simply because their resentment for President Tsai and what she stands for is greater than their fears of Chinese taking over Taiwan. So this has also been a non-traditional element, if you will, in the spreading of disinformation within Taiwan.
What do you think can be done to curb the spread of disinformation?
Right. Well, that's the other part of the equation. Certainly, efforts that have been ongoing must continue to identify and to track sources of disinformation. Again, both coming from China, from outside China, and here within Taiwan. There needs to be continued efforts to develop applications on Facebook, on Twitter, on cell phones that can flag and that can counter disinformation. We need certainly continued collaboration between the government and the private sector, for example, Facebook, to prevent the spread of disinformation. And we saw an example of this in the lead up to the presidential elections here in 2020. Whereby a number of content farms that were known to be generating and spreading disinformation were flagged by Facebook. And basically what Facebook did, they made it impossible for people to share on the Facebook platform any pages that came from those particular content farms, which eventually were shut down as well. Great majority of which, by the way, were run by Taiwanese business people who had business connections back in China. Where necessary, we need legal instruments to punish repeat offenders. That includes, in the extreme, shutting down their operations or removing their broadcast or cable license. And we saw that with one particular TV station in Taiwan that was a repeat offender, and that is run by an individual who is making millions and millions of dollars back in China and has been actively involved in other means to promote unification and sow confusion here in Taiwan. On a more strategic level, we need greater surveillance, and this is the whole of society effort, but greater surveillance of disinformation trends so that the government can preempt disinformation rather than simply react to disinformation by presenting the facts before a disinformation campaign or operation can be initiated. The title of my chapter touches upon strategic communication. I think this is also very important, both at domestic and international level, so that Taiwan can close off some areas that can be exploited by purveyors of disinformation, hostile states, CCP and all that. And finally, one last point, and again, this is ongoing, sustained media literacy campaigns within the school system in Taiwan, as well as among vulnerable groups within Taiwan. We need to see deepened coordination between government and civil society, and much better efforts should be made as well to make sure that NGOs in Taiwan that have been developing applications, that have been tracking means of disinformation and impact of disinformation are properly funded. And this has been a bit of a blind spot for Taiwan. These organizations, NGOs oftentimes are one generation ahead of government when it comes to technology and these things. But oftentimes they have been underfunded, and that can only derail or at least undermine their efforts to make the contributions that are needed so that Taiwanese society can counter Chinese disinformation.
Apologies on my side from pushing you towards the cybersecurity domain, even though your article was indeed on strategic communication. But as we already established, those are not siloed domains. So thank you so much for playing ball with me here. And I just want to point out that indeed, what also according to what you said, there's good news because apparently big tech can be pushed to deliver when it comes to curbing of disinformation. Of course, they're reluctant to do so, but it's good news that there are still methods to push them towards that. Now, Vida, in terms of recommendations from this side from the Baltic side, is there anything you could add? Vida, we don't hear you. Apologies.
Yes, sorry, my mistake.
No
I'm
worries.
sorry. Yes,
it's good now.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree that most of what Michael has said probably applies to the Baltic states as well. Private-public partnership, and we have seen those attempts already in the Baltic states as well, when private media outlets would launch an initiative where just verifying the news, right? Explaining to the society that this is what was announced, this is the information that we have received that has been made public. Is it true or not? So initiatives like this, and they have been successful indeed. They deliver the message very, very clearly of what is right and what is wrong, what is accurate and what is not accurate. So partnerships like this or projects like this, and of course, funding sometimes for them is very important. And many other policies have been implemented as well. But I'm an advocate of the position that hybrid threats continue, and hybrid warfare tools keep evolving and changing. And it's very difficult to preemptively take measures. So the key here is cultivating or educating the society, cultivating the society's awareness, probably I should put it this way, and understanding of what the threats are and how the information should be perceived. And here, of course, the crucial point is media literacy. As Michael has already mentioned, but in the case of the Baltics, I would see that there's another crucial point when it comes to the ethnic group policies, right? When we have different ethnic groups, and research shows what we see in the data, that they are more susceptible to different misinformation campaigns, also because their source of information is often different from the rest of the population, and they are more receptive to that information coming from hostile actors, and not alienating those ethnic groups from the rest of the society or within the country, not alienating them. This is also a very important thing to consider. So this cohesion of the society is also a very important element here when we talk about the country's resilience to hybrid threats. So probably that would be my main point that I would add. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have, in fact, some questions from the audience, and I think Ivo is very well set to answer that. And the question, in fact, is, what are hybrid threats, and is it a new phenomenon? Ivo, I'm sure you hear this question a lot. What is the response here?
Thank you. Well, yes, I do. And unfortunately, I don't think that there is very, very clear answer. Well, hybrid, as we mostly know, probably comes from Greek and means mixture. So hybrid threats, it should be a mixture of different threats. What we can add to the mixture, it depends probably the recipe on the scholar who is talking about it, or on the state who is practicing it. So most probably there should be economy there, information, also diplomacy, and last not least military. And of course subversions of them, subdivisions of these things, like cyber threats as well. And sometimes in the academic community there is a discussion that should the military threats be included or not, and there is no joint answer to that yet, but I assume that probably they should, because these things are very closely connected. If you ask that how new thing it is, then definitely not new. The earliest military theoretician whose works we still have is Sun Tzu from China, and 2,500 years ago, and his ideas are very, very similar to what is described in the security strategies currently. So it's not something very Russian or not something very new.
Excellent. And while I have your attention, thank you for clearing that name and thank you for explaining this. We probably should have started with this, and that's on me. But I just want to, kind of pull on the thread of the goals of how do we strengthen. So what can be done in terms of resilience against hybrid threats, right? So in your chapter, you speak of two goals for the next decade: to strengthen the Baltics against hybrid threats. And actually, both have one thing in common. They both speak of linking with continental Europe, with Western Europe, to increase our resilience. So one thing you're talking about is that we need to plug into the European power grid rather than the current BREL one. So if you could also explain that. And the other one is about building the European gauge rail connection, Rail Baltica. We have it right here a few blocks away from our venue. So how optimistic are you regarding both of these goals, and has Russia tried to hamper this in any way so far, given the importance of these goals to our resilience?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, yes, my chapter was about energy and infrastructure, so that's why these are the two main goals. But even there, we have to keep in mind that being secure or building up resilience, it's something like washing teeth. It has to be done on daily basis. It's not like that we will finish these two projects and then we are done and then can live happily ever after. But yeah, sure, electricity has the importance because, well, we are very dependent in everything on that, and also transportation. If the goods are not moving, then we are in deep trouble soon as well. And I assume that in this sense we are a little bit in better position maybe than Taiwan, because well, we have Europe quite close, and then there is friends are close by, and then we can integrate there. On execution of these two projects, I'm rather optimistic. Well, first of all, for the first time, the Baltic electricity systems were synchronized in 1960s, at the beginning of 1960s, 1962 to be more precise, and that's how it continues. But at that time, we were tied to the Soviet system. In order to synchronize from that so-called BREL and then to synchronize with the Central European power grid, the investments have been made already for quite a long time. There is Estlink 1, Estlink 2, the power cables undersea power cables that are connecting Estonia with Finland and Northern Europe as whole from there, especially the power plants in Norway. And also North Balt link between Lithuania and Sweden, also undersea link built for the same reason. The Harmony link and Litpol link between Lithuania and Poland are under construction at the moment. So it seems that it's possible to succeed by 2025. But the new question that will arise there is that if there is enough electricity supply, that we know a lot about, we have heard lately a lot about climate change, which probably will, which already now has influenced our climate a little bit, that there are more storms than there used to be earlier, which also means more power cuts. And the European Green Deal also means that many things that we now do with basically oil, for example, the cars and then the rail, they are transferred to electricity. So there might be some problems. On Russian influence in this in that business, I haven't heard, at least in the public sources, open sources, it's not present. With Rail Baltic, the things are a little bit different. Of course, yes, already we can see some first installations in the physical background or in the countryside in the pre-Baltic states. But here, the environmental lobby against this railway has been much more influential, especially in Estonian, which is quite weird that, well, Estonian, it's especially unpopular in the Estonian second biggest city of Tartu. The people there had an idea that it should go via Tartu, which is, well, not worth doing or impossible if you look at the map. And once they understood that it is not going to be there, then they find many mistakes. It's too expensive, it's too bad for environment, and so on. So it's not the NIMBY effect that not in my backyard, but vice versa, that if it's not in my backyard, then it's very, very bad thing. And there the Russian interests, of course, using such people are much more obvious as well, because Russia has been interested in the possibilities, at least for transit via the Baltic states. Of course, it's maybe to some extent losing importance after they have built a huge port in Ust-Luga, but still their gauge in Baltic states would be good for them. But I assume that actually the solution is going to be useful for everybody, that we have north-south connection, the Rail Baltic via the Baltic states European gauge that links us with Central and Western Europe, and we have east-west connections that come from the eastern border and then go to the ports, the Baltic Sea ports. They are still using the white gauge or Soviet Russian gauge, if you want to name it like that. Yes, this would be. Thank you. It for me.
Thank you. And Michael, do you hear? To just keep this going, that we check back and we compare, right? To keep that to the spirit of comparison. Do you hear any similarities with Taiwan here? Ivo spoke of transport, of energy, and we hear this overdependence coming in, right? But Ivo is optimistic as to the solutions, but maybe you can share with us your views on the risks and also your recommendations from where you stand.
Well, certainly on the risks, there are several similarities. Let me start off with trade, for example. Taiwan is highly reliant on China, on the Chinese market for its economy, particularly in terms of exports and manufacturing. In fact, a little bit more than 40% of Taiwanese exports end up in the Chinese market. And that, by the way, has continued to grow even in a period of greater tensions in the Taiwan Strait. So that's a subject that is well worth exploring as well. There is even a school of thought that says that greater economic interdependence might actually act as a brake against greater hostilities, or at least kinetic hostilities in the Taiwan Strait. That remains unproven, but certainly a theory that's been out there. So nonetheless, that overdependence on the Chinese market exposes Taiwan to blackmail, to bans, oftentimes by sector, so that China uses the denial of tourism, for example, or the import of food products, as we saw last year, to try to punish the central government. But oftentimes it's even more precise, and they use these means to punish municipalities that tend to support the policy of the central government, or conversely to reward municipalities that are governed by politicians who are a bit more amenable to Chinese positions on unification, on one country, two systems, or on the construct known as the 1992 consensus. So they use those to reward municipalities and then again try to exacerbate divisions between those municipalities and the central government. As I mentioned earlier, there's about 1 million Taiwanese business people who work and live in China, oftentimes as employers. On several occasions, those individuals and their organizations that represent them in China have been weaponized by China, again, to try to act as a lobby against the Taiwanese government, or oftentimes to spread disinformation or cause trouble for the central government. Another point, Taiwan being an export-reliant economy, it is dependent on economic growth. That economic growth is contingent on its ability to trade abroad, so that is outside China. Pressure by the Chinese regime can also undermine the signing of free trade agreements between Taiwan and other economies. We have seen that in the case of Australia, for example, or even try to block Taiwan's accession to trade blocs like the CPTPP, for example. In terms of energy security, Taiwan here again is usually reliant on imported sources of energy, particularly oil and LNG, which creates a vulnerability that China could exploit, for example, through a naval blockade. Taiwan simply does not have the ability to store sufficient strategic resources to be able to last several months if the Chinese try to block off its energy supply. Taiwan has been investing heavily in renewable energy in recent years. That was one of the platforms of the Tsai administration. But projections into 2025 demonstrate that that would still account for a small fraction of the total energy requirements, especially as the current government also intends to phase out nuclear energy in Taiwan over safety concerns. And here, Fukushima certainly focused minds in Taiwan as to the potential hazards of having nuclear energy in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan's power grid itself, the ports, distribution, nuclear power plants, are within range of conventional military strikes by the Chinese, so either ground-launched or air-launched, but also to cyber attacks and possibly physical sabotage by CCP proxies in Taiwan, such as pro-Beijing organized crime, pro-unification political parties, sub-state actors, and whatnot. The grid is aging. It lacks redundancy. As we saw last year during a series of blackouts that were caused by a technical glitch down in southern Taiwan in Kaohsiung, and that affected cities across Taiwan. Energy security is a top concern for multinationals, which means that both coercion by China and policies for sustainable power generation by the Taiwanese government that are not regarded as sufficient could also have a negative impact on the willingness of foreign companies to establish themselves in Taiwan, which is crucial for Taiwan because it's not only good for its economy, but also contributes to its deterrent against a Chinese attack. Now, transport is another issue as well. Due to its geographical proximity to China, Taiwan is certainly vulnerable to disruptions in civil and military transportation, both within the Taiwan Strait, but also in the Bashi Channel leading up into the South China Sea, but also into the East China Sea, where in 2013, as I recall, the Chinese unilaterally declared an ADIZ that they could enforce as well to try to disrupt air traffic coming into Taiwan. Taiwan, however, has one advantage. It's an island, which means that China's ability to disrupt land transportation is severely limited. Now, I'm going to preempt you and move into recommendations, if I may. The logical first step for Taiwan, and this is something that they have attempted through their new southbound policy that targets South and Southeast Asia, but now also exploring new commercial avenues with Central Eastern Europe, like Lithuania, for example, is simply to reduce reliance on the Chinese economy through market diversification. This is difficult because China has played a very good game in encouraging that dependence, but also building up the infrastructure and capacity that other countries like India, for example, they haven't arrived at that point yet. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for Taiwanese companies to decide to uproot their manufacturing in China and then build a similar site in India or Thailand or Vietnam, for example. Again, going back to strategic communication, you need a ramping up of those efforts to help the international community understand that the Taiwan dispute is not simply a matter that exists between Taiwan and China or within the Taiwan Strait, but that the repercussions of an embargo, let alone kinetic hostilities in the Taiwan Strait, would be regional and very likely global as well. So the more that Taiwan makes the international community realize that this is a global issue, the more resilience could be brought upon Chinese efforts to discourage the Taiwanese or simply take them over. Taiwan should deepen investment in renewable energy, certainly, particularly areas like new generation storage, so large batteries, dispersal, resilience. These are all issues that are currently being explored and hopefully will be tackled at some point. And finally, militarily, the Taiwanese need to invest in greater capabilities for counter-blockade operations and possibly explore jointness with regional allies. I know this is tricky, but they will have to sit down and talk about these issues at some point. Again, because those economies within the region, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Singapore, Philippines, you name it, their economies would also likely be disrupted in the event of a Chinese blockade against Taiwan. Again, because of Taiwan's geographic location, it's very difficult for China to simply isolate Taiwan and not for its operations to not have an impact on regional countries. So again, part of Taiwan's strategic communication is to encourage regional partners to realize that they also have a stake in making sure that China does not move in that direction.
Right, and Michael rightly has noted my inclination towards recommendations today. Guilty as charged. So I turn to Ivo because you have this tremendous experience as a practitioner. And given the fact that the volume and the discussion is really geared towards recommendations, how interested the practitioner community is in our recommendations, in think tank recommendations in the first place, and what can be done to build more efficient exchanges with practitioners, both across the Baltics and in Baltic-Taiwan cooperation?
Right, I guess the mic is on now. Very good question. I guess that it depends very much on the practitioner and also on the think tank or the researcher we are speaking about. Generally, I guess that we have to keep in mind what Winston Churchill nicely said, that I'm always ready to learn, although I don't always like being taught. This definitely applies to the practitioners as well. So being a think tanker and then giving your advice, you have to be sensitive with that thing. The other thing, concerning whatever exchanges, is it between academia or think tankers and practitioners or between different countries, trust is one of the most relevant things. And it's especially important in the security sector because in order to give relevant advice, you have to be informed, and then many things in these fields are classified for obvious reasons. But I would say that I really see that the interest for the recommendations is there. Although sometimes, of course, if there are different recommendations, then of course it's a possibility to choose for the practitioners to choose the recommendations that they like the most. And how to make it better, I guess Leah is really doing a very good job, especially in the Baltic states. I don't even know by heart how many joint projects with Leah I've had in recent years. But it's quite a lot, and this is definitely one of the ways to build trust. And I assume that the same it will apply with Taiwan as well. That we, for example, with Michael, we see for the first time online here, if it happens several times over some years, and we meet sometimes in person as well, then I guess there will be more trust than maybe there is now. I guess all the trust we have at the moment is that since Una has invited us, then probably we should be more or less decent people. So yeah, trust is the key word, and I assume it can be built between us and between Baltics and Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. And I'm good that my word carries weight with you, that if the people who are in the room with me are decent people. I completely agree with your analysis here. Now, as we're approaching our final round of remarks, we actually have a couple of audience questions. Now, if I just may ask you, chairs always do that, to keep it brief yet succinct, and I think it's a very important question that we have here. How to tell between dissidents within the civil society and a disinformation campaign from external sources? Please, anyone who would like to pick this question.
Well, if I may jump in and try to be succinct, and thank you for including me as one of the decent individuals. I mean, this is a very difficult balance that absolutely must be struck in democratic societies. We need to tell between individuals who have different opinions, opinions that might go completely against the wishes and policies of the ruling government, but that nevertheless within a democratic society should be countenanced. And that is why, for example, in Taiwan, you still have individuals who can gather outside public venues, very popular tourist areas, and wave the People's Republic of China flag, because those individuals support unification. That has sparked a debate within Taiwanese society. Some elements are saying we should ban those, but this is an expression of people's political preferences. If, on the other hand, individuals are known to be receiving money from an authoritarian regime and willingly distributing information that would be harmful to national security or to individuals, and again, COVID provides a clear example of the risks, then we cross a certain line, as we see in other democracies like Canada or the UK, for example, that have very strict rules on hate speech or comments, writing, or speeches that incite violence against certain minorities, ethnic group, religious groups. These are lines that simply should not be crossed. But we need, for that to work, you need an agreement between the government and the governed, and also a society that believes that the government will act responsibly when it does decide to take action, whether it's legal means or shutting down organizations and whatnot. So again, this is not an easy issue. It's very easy. It's a slippery slope. It's easy to exploit, to abuse the powers that are given to a state when it comes to these issues. But that it really depends, is contingent on a bond of trust that exists between the public and the government. No easy answer, I'm sorry.
However, trust seems to be like the word of the day today. Thank you, Michael. It was a good answer, even though it wasn't easy. And Vida, do you have anything to add from the Baltic shores on this? How do we tell from the just a dissident who has his right not to agree, and a campaign?
Yeah, I think much has been said by Michael, right? That it's a very difficult balance to strike, and maybe it should be done well. It should be the interests of the state probably should be concerned, and what's the vulnerabilities. It's very easy to exploit those rights to speak and rights to express, and that's, unfortunately sometimes the state would take measures that would not secure the right of everyone to speak, I guess. But yeah, Michael has said that already, so that I don't have much to add. Thank you.
So more commonalities,
That's a
I
good
believe, right? That's another commonality that we share. We have a question precisely regarding Taiwan. So, Michael, if just in a few words you could answer, I think you answered already, but just how do populists and fake news activists affect domestic politics in Taiwan? How huge is their impact?
That's another tough question. I mean, quantifying the impact of disinformation is a challenge, not only for Taiwan, but for countries worldwide. I would say that if the aim of disinformation was to convince the public, for example, that Taiwan's future lies in the embrace of the People's Republic of China under Xi Jinping, I would say that that campaign has failed miserably and very likely even has backfired. That being said, if the aim is to exacerbate polarization within Taiwan's body politics, I would say, especially in election time, in the lead up to referendums, or even in the lead up to local elections, that spread of disinformation, again, coming both from across the Taiwan Strait, but also from within Taiwan, sometimes for different but perhaps overlapping reasons, has certainly consolidated the existence of two camps that simply seem unable to sit down together and resolve issues as one, particularly facing off against the external threat that China poses to Taiwanese society. In those areas, I think disinformation and other means has been harmful to Taiwan's democracy, to its society. And we're simply seeing an example in the United States right now with the split between Republicans and Democrats. And what I'm seeing is that it encourages extreme views and also succeeds in silencing people who stand in the middle, who perhaps would be more amenable to cooperation between the two sides, but now simply being reasonable oftentimes results in you and your family members being threatened. Then these people have gone silent. So you're seeing polarization and move towards the extremes on both sides. And that is definitely an area where I think disinformation has succeeded in its aims, if indeed that was the initial aim.
Thank you. And now for the final round of remarks. Looking forward to this 2022 that apparently has already started, who knew? I want you to give me the most pressing threat. Ivo, please. Sorry, no sound.
I did it again. Well, unfortunately, I guess it's military at the moment. Well, I guess many other components of the hybrid we can already see. Definitely, there is the diplomatic pressure that has been in the air already for some time. There is a force buildup. There are already cyber attacks, not against the Baltic states yet, but against Ukraine and then some other targets. So there are sanction system is placed. So the economic struggle is very much in the mix. So unfortunately for 2022, many other cyber threats already have materialized, and the most tragic or I'd say, well, yeah, you probably understand. Unfortunately, it's military threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. Vida, to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm afraid I have to present two of them, not one, at least when it comes to Lithuania, because one that Ivo already mentioned definitely is this in the context of geopolitical situation, and the situation has very much complicated recently, right? And I would say that this will be well, NATO's relations with Russia probably will very significantly affect the situation in the Baltics as well, because definitely there will be, well, we should expect much even more interference or even more attempts to influence the countries in the region. And then at the same time, I cannot not mention, well, the particular case of Lithuania. It probably doesn't apply to Latvia or Estonia, but I would say that in the case of Lithuania, 2022, in terms of hybrid threats, will probably be a very different year. We don't know yet how the relations with China in the diplomatic role will unfold, but I think that in this coming year we will see a lot of new developments that probably we have not been familiar yet until now. So that these would be the two, sorry, not one, but two very different threats that probably brings us closer to Taiwan, even more close, even closer than what I said before.
Thank you, Vida. And Michael, to you.
Thank you. Well, I also have two, if I may. I think the most serious threat from a Taiwanese perspective, ironically, lies in Europe, and this is what's going on over Ukraine right now. We do suspect that Beijing is paying very, very close attention, not only to what Vladimir Putin is doing along the border with Ukraine, but even more so how NATO and the European Union and United States would react in case of an attempted invasion of Ukraine or even limited incursions into Ukraine. Beijing is taking notes. It could either, if there is major hostilities over Ukraine involving United States, this could provide an opportunity for China while United States are distracted to try to make a move against Taiwan. So this is certainly something that worries the people here, but also, the type of reaction that we see from NATO, United States, if Russia gets away with incursions into Ukraine without major consequences, the Chinese could learn also a very dangerous lesson and conclude that they also could make a move against Taiwan and would not suffer undue consequences as a result of their actions. The second one, and this is a very difficult one to predict because China is not exactly transparent, it would be a major economic slowdown in China leading to serious political instability that could perhaps even challenge the CCP's ability to remain in power, or at least how the CCP perceives that threat, which could then compel it to adopt what is seen as more irrational behavior, i.e. externalizing a conflict and directing public anger and discontent, not so much at the CCP, but an external element like Taiwan, which could then very quickly lead to escalation in the Taiwan Strait. I would maintain, though, that the likelier scenario is the one surrounding Ukraine at the moment.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that, asking for this, I kind of pushed us all into a little bit of a depressing mood. But I really hope that Mr. Eric Huang, the head of the Taipei Mission in Latvia, for his final remarks will put us back on track for a more optimistic outlook. Mr. Huang, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Uno. I think we have really truly a great discussion here today, and I learned a lot. I would like first to thank Director Spruce and colleagues of LIIA in organizing this meaningful conference to present the book that contains insightful observations and solutions provided for the hybrid threats of different dimensions that we are all facing today. I also would like to thank Uno for moderating the panel discussion, and Michael, Vida, and Ivo, and all the participants online for making great contributions. I think you are absolutely right to point out that Taiwan and the Baltic states share a lot of similarities in the forms of hybrid threats. I also would like to point out that we have such commonalities, not only because that geopolitically we are facing similar situations, but also that non-democratic countries that are threatening us also learn from each other. Now, we also should be careful that if the authoritarian teacher and student would also collaborate with each other or even help each other in pursuing their aggressive agendas. Therefore, Taiwan and Baltics are not geographically separated as it seems to be, but we are strategically interconnected. And as we are closely linked, as the front lines in the global fight between democracy and autocracy, we should also help each other. I think this is the main idea for having this meaningful event and the project to compile the book that share experiences between Taiwan and Baltics and among our small democracies. I'm also pleased to learn that we touched several dimensions of hybrid threat during the course of our discussion and study. For example, there are dimensions in political legitimacy, societal resilience, critical infrastructure, energy security, and cybersecurity. Those are the main aspects of hybrid threats, but it is a non-exhaustive list. We know it very well. There is at least a very critical issue that we may not have enough opportunity to talk about today or in this project. It is the issue of supply chain resilience. I will share it with you briefly later. But before that, I also would like to point out that as the threats are hybrid, new kind of threat can always be invented or synthesized by our enemies. It may also be very difficult to identify and tackle threats one at a time. Our enemies will not kindly allow us to do that. It will be too easy for us. Those threats may come all at once. Therefore, we must constantly prepare ourselves and upgrade our capacity and capabilities. We should not be overwhelmed by our enemies. Now back to the supply chain issue. In my job, I cover 3 Baltic states, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In the last year, I worked on a project for Taiwan to establish the new office in Lithuania called the Taiwanese Representative Office in Lithuania in November. And I believe that all of you are aware of what's happening after the opening of Taiwan's new office in Vilnius. Of course, it is not only the opening of my office, but there are also other issues pertaining to Lithuania's insistence on the value of human rights and the rejection of the format of 17+1. But China's economic aggression begins right after the opening of my new office. China deletes Lithuania from China's customs clearance system, preventing all Lithuanian goods from exporting to China. China calls it a technical issue, but that technical issue is still not fixed today. China is very proud of its 5G equipment and asks countries to use it. I'm wondering why China cannot have the technical capability to simply add Lithuania back to its database after more than a month. China also imposes so-called secondary sanction, forbidding companies of other countries from using Lithuania-made components if companies want to export those products to China, and China denied such action. This is unprecedented, unlawful, and undeclared economic sanction. If we allow this to happen, soon every small democracy will become China's next target because China can. The international rules of trade will also be undermined. Everyone will be affected. And please do not forget that Lithuania is a member of the European Union. An attack on an EU member is an attack on the whole European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, Taiwan will do whatever we could to help our friends. We think that every country should also lend their support for Lithuania. I'm glad to witness that many European countries and the United States have expressed their strong support for Lithuania. In the face of the hybrid threats launched by authoritarian countries, we could never forget the lessons we learned from history. It is probably best expressed on the wall of the US Holocaust Memorial Museum that reads, "First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I think it is a similar situation in international community. Each member of the international community should look after one another. Ladies and gentlemen, the techniques of hybrid threats that non-democratic countries use and the solutions we know are very well documented in the book we presented to you. But there are many other kinds of hybrid threats that we can always be invented. That people, other countries can always invent it and synthesized. We should pay attention to what we already know and stay alert of the emerging ones. We should work together. Together we are stronger. And it is especially true for small democracies of Taiwan and the Baltic states. Thank you very much for all your contributions today. Thank you.
And in the name and representing the editors, Professor Andris Sprūds, Cynthia Brock, and myself, we thank you for being with us today for this event. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.